So Scott Adams is presenting a fallacy on his show of you shouldn't care about what happens down the line to your genes because your genes are going to be end up so mixed that it won't matter. That you'll only have a little piece of anyone, and therefore it doesn't matter. I would say to Scott Adams that is entirely incorrect. Um, it doesn't stop mattering that you have impacts in the world because those impacts are divided. Because the other side of the middle of the mechanism you talk about, which is yes, your genes are getting split, they're getting crossed over, even the chromosomes are getting divided. And yes, you are diluting yourself away into the future generations. But the other side of the middle is for every moment of dilution, you are spreading into more people and you are having more impact into the physical world. All of it balances fully, such that, yeah, down the line, 5 generations down the line, there's probably not going to have someone who has my 32 chromosomes, all of them aligned in the same way. But there's going to be 32 people, each of them having one of my chromosomes for sure. Or there's going to be even more than 32 if you take for granted crossover at the sexual level, which is that chromosomes, they split at a certain place and they recombine with the female side of the same chromosome. So all in all, you end up having the very same impact as if you were to have left your genome in whole. The fallacy is as follows. We evolved to care about what's proximate to us. We evolved to care about the fate of our children and our grandchildren a little bit, and then our great-great-grandchildren, well, the occasion doesn't show enough throughout evolutionary time for us to evolve a strong instinctual response to great-great-grandchildren. But that doesn't mean that rationally it is not as important. In fact, I would argue it is all that matters. The continuity of a type, of a genomic type, throughout the centuries across the multiple generations. And yes, it matters. It doesn't matter that you won't find yourself fully reformed into one of your descendants. Each of the genes that you would have contributed will change the world in its own ways. There is a difference between a world where my genome has been spreading and my genome has not been spreading, and instead some other genome came in. This other genome will have different characteristics. If it is not European, it will have different behaviors. It will encode different behaviors in the societies that inherit it. So let's listen to what Scott has to say.
Let me finish the point I was going to make. If you're worried that your goal is to spread your genes, I've heard people say that if you don't get married and have kids, you failed in life because your primary goal is to spread your genes.
Pretty much, yes. Now, there are situations where you are unable to do that, and there are other measures of success that a sterile person could enjoy contributing to the well-being of their brothers and their sisters' children. But yeah, other than this, totally.
How many of you think that way?
I think that way.
That would be a good definition of success. That
is the only definition that matters. Everything else that you do, cartoon drawings, intellectual reflection, having a Lamborghini, all of it is to impress females so that that you end up making more babies.
That is you lives on in your children. Well, I saw somebody say that on social media today. And here's the reframe for that. By the 4th generation, all of your contribution will be randomized.
You are mistaking here dilution with randomized, and being together doesn't not being together for two genes or for two chromosomes doesn't mean not having any impact, nor does it mean that the impact will be random. Your chromosomes may be divided, but they will have impacts in exponentially growing number of individuals.
Right. When you get together with one mate and you have a kid, it's about half you. When that kid gets married and has another kid, it's maybe a quarter of you, but you're not even guaranteed that, right?
Approximately a quarter.
Because it's not really half and half ever. You're not even guaranteed that you got your half. By the time you're the fourth,
but you are focusing in an exponential function. You are focusing on individuals. The story that you're not telling here is that you had more than one kid, and they had more than one kid, and their kids had more than one kid. You are trying to focus people on a single line of descent and noting correctly, well, that one person is more diluted. It's further away from me. My great-grandchildren are further away genetically from me than my children. Yes, there is a dilution effect happening. There is also an exponential growing effect happening in where these genes end up. They end up in more and more and more individuals. And if you just make 3 babies per generation, that's, well, let's take a number that will be easy to work with, exponentials of 2. If you make 4 babies, you have one copy of you in the descendant generation, because each of these babies, you have one more copy of you in the next generation than there is in this one, because each of these babies is 0.5 u. So we have 0.5 plus 0.5 plus 0.5 plus 0.5. That gives us 2. So you are twice represented in the next generation. Now, if these babies each make 4 babies, that's 4 times 4, that's 16. Now, these 16 people may be 0.25 related to you, but that's 0.25 times 16. 0.25 times 16 gives us 4. Down the next generation, they may be 12.5% related to you, but you have 16 times 4. You have 64 grandchildren, 64 great grandchildren. So yes, they are 12.5% related to you, but there are 64 of them. And so you end up with 8 representation of your genome at the great-grandchildren level. And the next generation, the 5th one, where you would be diluted at the 6.25% level, you end up with 16 representations of your genome at this generation. Now, they are diluted. They are spread across 256 descendants. But you're all there. You are all there in the great move forward. That is the other side of the middle that you are omitting to make your biased case, Scott Adams.
Generation, you can barely tell who contributed anything, right?
It's not because you can't tell. Like, having exponential effect into the sum of all human behavior down the line, being in 256 people of the future, just 5 generations down the line, is massive. It doesn't matter that you can't tell. The genes can tell, and the world can tell. The world will be different if you have these 256 descendants or if you don't. The world can be brown tomorrow. It can be white. It can be all sorts of things. It can be, I was seeing Asian AI, underwear images on the Discord. Some guys have been starting to share these images to test me. Oh my God, they are beautiful. It would be a beautiful future, half Asian, half white, AI generated porn.
And you've brought in all these outside people to be the people you marry. You're only a few generations from being irrelevant.
The you that you use here is not your genes. It's the you as an individual. But the you as an individual is always almost irrelevant. It's irrelevant that you have the particular combination of genes that you have. So there's a big cone of ancestors that lead down to you, and the genes are intersecting at the moment that is you, but then they're spreading out in another triangle of descendants. So the you really that you use here is a human you. It is an individual, I'm a person, I have a brain you. But if you consider that you are your genes, most importantly, and that you are in fact just the byproduct of these genes and their travel into the future, then you realize that the you that you talk about doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is this intersection of genes that eventually spreads out. But it spreads out in exponentially growing numbers of individuals.
The fact that you might have contributed some, genetic raw material to somebody 5 generations down is so trivial.
It is not trivial. The whole idea is that the sum of these contributions is what leads to the difference between England and Zimbabwe.
And so unimportant that...
Well, you say it's unimportant, but you don't make a case. If it was unimportant, then I can take everyone from Zimbabwe, I can move them into England, I can take everyone from England, move them into Zimbabwe, and I will barely notice anything. Just the makeup that they sell at pharmacies may just be slightly darker or slightly lighter. There might be some adjustments with skin color, but if what you say is real, then it wouldn't matter if I switch populations like this. I would get England continuing to be England, and I would get Zimbabwe continuing to be Zimbabwe, even if filled with English people.
They shouldn't be part of your decision making.
Well, it should be the only decision that matters. Because out of all the things that you do in life, the only thing that will have such an impact that you can say, hey, I have a significant contribution to 256 individuals in 120 years from now, or 100 years from now. That is something that you cannot do with anything else. You could have $1 billion right now. I challenge you to find a way to make that $1 billion resonate down the line 100 years later. That is hard. It's hard to even think of a way in which that wealth wouldn't dilute itself and wouldn't be mismanaged by someone. It's very hard to impact the future. Very hard. You want to try being an author? You have 99.9% chance that your book will not even make it through the first week in terms of a successful book, let alone 100 years later. But you just penis, vagina, tap, tap, tap. You just zing your penis into the right uterus, close to the right uterus. You inject your sperm, and that is done. You have impacted the future in a significant manner. There is nothing else like this. There is nothing else than the great equalizer of reproduction.
Yeah, your tiny little contribution to the gene pool will get washed and diluted to nothing after.
Absolutely not. It will be diluted, it will be spread, but it will be there.
A few generations anyway. So it really doesn't matter. I do think that we're designed, or we evolved, or we were created to want to reproduce.
And of course, we wouldn't evolve that way if it wasn't that it makes a difference. If it was so diluted that nature can't even tell, then why would we even care about our children? It's because caring about our children ensured more of our genes into the real world. And it's been going on for 4 billion years. You don't get evolution if there's no difference. You don't get evolution at all. If what you suggest that the randomization is so high that it's all blurred, then we would be all blurred in who we love and who we give our inheritance to. We're not. We give our inheritance to our children. We love our children. We love our wives. That is how it is, and it couldn't be that way if everything was random.
So if you're connected in any way to the reproductive process of society, I think you do find meaning. So you could be just working in law enforcement. I think that's connected to reproduction.
No, it is connected to the extent that the law enforcement person is making money, which impresses a woman, which allows them to breed. That's how law enforcement is connected to reproduction.
Because if crime ran rampant, there'd be less reproduction probably.
Well, no, there would be more, but it would be parasitic. So you'd have pirates making a living out of just stealing cars from the highway or stopping people at stop, which you kind of get in certain places. In places where crime punishment is too soft, you end up having this lifestyle develop. But yeah, law enforcement doesn't help reproduction. It helps a certain kind of reproduction and it abolishes another. Law enforcement makes it so that we evolve in a world where there is natural selection for peaceful behavior. That is the world in which Europeans have lived for hundreds of years. Remove law enforcement, and you have populations still reproducing, but they're evolving toward a criminal lifestyle because there's no punishment for being a criminal.
So there are lots of ways to be part of that reproductive chain.
Well, all of these parts where you contribute as a cuckold are not valid because whatever is the contribution of a cuckold, whether you care for the poor or you give to the homeless or whatever generous thing you think involves you in the reproduction of other is cuckoldry. And it is meant to disappear, and it will disappear with evolution because it cannot be maintained. You are favoring the competitors to your own babies. So any sort of service you give to anyone who's not related to you is actually helping your disappearance with time. And eventually, all that's left are humans who care for their own babies.
But weirdly, and I know this seems upside down, the least important thing you could do is contribute your DNA.
Absolutely ridiculous. If you do not contribute your DNA, you do not contribute to anything that will survive the intergenerational barrier. That is, any system you can think of generosity and care and help, any cuckoldry of any kind. And I include in this saving people who are genetically unrelated to you, anything. Trying to dedicate your life to discovery and science and deciding not to have babies, but thinking that your science will help other people have babies. All of this will disappear through evolution because you are having a behavior that is unfit. You are investing energy that doesn't lead to people like you maintained into the future. Rodila says, with police present, you have accountants who reproduce. Without police, you have warlords and pirates reproducing. So police don't reproduce. They help one kind reproduce over another. Well, yes, for the beginning, but then police do reproduce. For police, it is just a job. So they do reproduce. I know policemen who have children.
Your DNA is the least important part of the whole process.
Absolutely false. If that was true, Zimbabwe and England, it wouldn't matter. I would give you a plane ticket to one of these two places, and you'd be like, Jeff, I really don't care. Give me one or the other, I'll go live there. No, you would care. You wouldn't go live in Zimbabwe. And that's because genes matter a lot. A lot.
Because there's plenty of DNA. We're not going to run out. We don't need yours.
Oh, and decided that we're not going to run out of DNA. Now, the problem, Scott, is so much graver. The problem is that we won't run out. We won't run out of bad ways to make up the human phenotype. We won't run out of parasitic DNA, of DNA of people who can't care for themselves, of DNA of low quality people. We'll never run out, and that's not the positive you think it is. It's actually a very bad thing. That's the problem. The problem is differential reproduction. There's no question that there will be plenty of DNA on this earth, no matter what we do in 1 billion years from now. I mean, no matter what we do, except the revolutionary phenotype. Except if we do this, then there will be no more DNA that's reproducing. But leaving aside the phenotypic revolution, there will be plenty of DNA. The question is, who will occupy the future? Will it be someone like you who can design cartoons, think with his head, who can analyze things of society and be clever in his contribution to society? Or will it be low-level, violent thugs? That is the question where it matters, and genes matter a lot in this.
We might need you to be a police officer. We might need you to, work your job and make some money so everybody can eat. Eating's good, but your genetic contribution, that's magical thinking.
Imagine being so deceived as Scott Adams is, that you don't see that with genes you have an impact down the line that spreads over all of the individuals of society eventually. You have an impact on hundreds of thousands of people down 20 generations. Hundreds of thousands of people are encoded with your genome inside of them. Imagine thinking, and that's 20 generations down the line, thousands of years down the line. Imagine thinking that this impact is small compared to what you do as a policeman. What you do as a policeman literally doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the day after you're done. Maybe you'll reach fame like a Derek Chauvin where, okay, people are going to talk about it still for maybe 20 years. It won't matter in 1,000 years from now. It won't matter in 1,000,000 years from now. And yet, the children that you will have left on this earth will matter forever, as long as any descendant of the human race still exists.
Yeah, you got some particles. Some parts of a gene will look like maybe they came from you in 4 generations, but it's irrelevant.
Well, it is not irrelevant, as I've made the case. If it was irrelevant, you wouldn't care about whether you live in the US or in Zimbabwe. And if I was to take the whole population of Zimbabwe and move them somewhere else, you also wouldn't care if you're going to live there. What if we're the bad guys here? Someone has